Hi, Beijing Spring, Andy Cohen, Gaylen Ross. Beijing Spring is in special selection at FIFDH 2021. It is a landmark documentary film that traces the history of the first underground art group that appeared after Mao's death, the Stars art group. We have Andy Cohen, Gaylen Ross. Hi guys, how are you?
Hi. Hello.
Okay, Andy is in Geneva and you, Gaylen, you're in New York City. So first I introduce Andy. Andy, you give you this brief introduction. You're an independent filmmaker and journalist who work focuses on human rights issues and social change. You directed, written and produced feature-lengths and short-form documentaries shown in most of the major international film festivals like Sundance, Tribeca, Berlin. Some of your most outstanding works include Chimay, or as a producer, Human Flow and Never Sorry by Ai Weiwei. Please, Andy, can you introduce your friend Gaylen Ross?
Yeah, so here's my dear friend Gaylen Ross, who actually brought me into the documentary film business when I was about 19 or 20 years old on our first film. So she was my mentor. And subsequently, we worked on many projects together. So I'm honored she's co-directing, producing, writing this important film, Beijing Spring. So I hand it over to you, Gaylen.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Andy. It's been a wonderful collaboration.
We're very happy to have you here with us, Guy. Why, this is a question for both of you, why choose to testify with your cinema? Why this choice to testify about something?
Gaylen, I'll let you answer that one.
Well, I think for me, I think cinema is about telling stories and about telling stories that normally are not revealed in the media, the press, and are very personal. And I think Beijing Spring tells an incredible human rights story in very, very personal ways through the art and the lives of these artists. And we get to know the period in the art through these remarkable people.
Andy?
Yep, what she said is exactly good for me.
Okay, so let's move forward. Why did you want to bear witness to the history of this group of Chinese artists? Why this film? Why Beijing Spring?
I think these artists, when they were creating their art, were very pure. It was art for art's sake. So there was no market. They were basically politically oppressed. And as an expression, as an outlet for their oppression, they chose art, music, photography, and then they hung out at Democracy Wall. So I felt that they were very pure, completely pure rebels, untainted by the market, motivated purely by the desire to express themselves, and also to create new forms in order to express these new feelings they were feeling when Deng Xiaoping came to power.
Gaylen.
I would add to that the enormous courage. I mean, it was expression with courage and with the artists and the human rights. They didn't call themselves human rights activists then, but they were looking for a way to have democracy in China after Mao. And this art was, you see in the film when they line up finally the art on the wall outside the museum, because they weren't allowed an exhibit inside the museum, the thousands and thousands of people who came to look at this art, which was like so new to them and so revolutionary and such freedom. And it lasted only a few days before it was taken down, like everything, But this was, and then they had a march. It was the courage of them that inspired me.
How can we approach this history by not being a historian? You're not. A journalist? You're not. And being Westerners?
So basically, it's a Davy and Goliath story. So I think even though it takes place in China, and you have to know a lot of history behind China, I think also it's a basic David against Goliath, a big power trying to crush a small voice. And that's how I approached it. But from a historical perspective and a Western perspective, it was very difficult because a lot of there was a lot of obstacles in my way because if who's this Western guy? I'm not going to open up to him, or what does he know, or what's he going to do? You know, is he going to exploit? So there was a lot of obstacles to overcome. And as Gaylen can tell you, there was even a bigger obstacle when we went to film in certain places. And her first shoot, she ended up getting escorted out of town.
That was for Shime. That was not for Beijing Spring.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's true. But then you went to Beijing and filmed a little that time.
Several times. But I think the other thing is that, Andy, you know this best, is that the art world has so changed in China, the official China view of art now and how China is represented in the art market means that they're so proud of these artists that they once, wanted to, throw away and consider almost degenerate art. I mean, that's true now too, right? Because there were no limitations. It's like, film us, film them. It's so different now, would you say?
The market is completely different and the motivations are completely different. And to get back to your question, David, it took a long time for us to hunt down. A lot of the film is shown through 16 millimeter footage shot by Chi Xiaoning, who was basically, everybody was hanging out there at Democracy Wall. It was a place to be. If you were a poet, if you were an activist, if you wanted to get information, everybody went to Democracy Wall. And that's where the activists and the artists coalesced and this democracy movement came about. There was, I caught wind that somebody had shot footage of Democracy Wall, of the Stars protests, but I couldn't find out where the footage was because he hid it. And the friend he gave it to hid it, and so on, because it was very sensitive. And the man who shot it ended up having to, he ended up fleeing to Japan, but he left the footage here. He died in Japan, and then his wife had control of the footage. Long story short, I tracked down some of his cousins, and we were able to find this footage, track it down, and then for the first time ever, you're going to see an officially censored part of Chinese history shown.
And it is an extraordinaire archive. Yeah. What's your personal link to China, Gaylen?
My personal link is Andy.
Okay.
I never been to China, and Andy said, "You go. We need these other artists to be filmed." So he sent me literally, and it was a remarkable experience. I mean, meeting these artists, and they're my age now, many of them. So we grew up so differently, and yet there were so many parallels. I mean, one of my favorite places in the film is when, this freedom came, and I think one of the artists, Wang Qingping, talks about we can dance now, and dancing was forbidden. And we have this wonderful footage in the film of rock and roll and dance. And this is so wonderful and naive and fresh and unique. And I'm thinking, wow, in the 70s, I guess, late 70s, there was, that music was already out of style, but they were just re-exploring it. And it was so lovely, to visit that with them.
Andy, to what extent is the story you discovered through this movie related to your long collaboration with Ai Weiwei?
Well, Weiwei was also a member of the Stars artists, and he was very instrumental in getting them accepted by the official establishment, because his father, who was a very famous poet, was also friends with the head of the art association, Zhang Fang, and he was able to introduce the artists to them, and he was able to get them a show. So Weiwei was instrumental in helping the Stars organize, though he always kind of took a outsider. Anything he did, he never wanted to go with the group. So he was part of it, but he also kept his distance. He gave some paintings in. And then when I was filming in Beijing, Weiwei had just gotten out of jail, and I visited one of the artists. So I tracked down the 35 millimeter footage, and then one of the artists was supposed to help me negotiate with the owners of the footage. One thing led to another, and he decided he didn't want to give me the footage. And he was also upset that I visited his studio after visiting Weiwei's studio, because Weiwei just got out of jail and he didn't want any attention shined on his studio to be associated with Weiwei. So I went to have lunch with Weiwei, and he saw that I was quite upset that I flew all the way here to Beijing. I tracked down this footage, trusted one of these artists with it, and basically he's screwing me. So Wei Wei gets on the phone, calls a particular artist, blah, 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 starts arguing with them. And then within 5 minutes, I was able to get a commitment to have 5 minutes of the footage. Now, mind you, this is footage that I spent years tracking down, so very difficult. So to answer your question, Wei Wei was instrumental also in helping bring the 16mm footage to the public. So very, very instrumental, very helpful. And he was a part of the group. When he was 21 years old, he was part of the start.
He was considered the baby, right?
He was a baby.
But during the production of Chimay, you were worried by Chinese authorities. It was the same for this movie, Gaylen?
No, not at all. Again, it was, the openness and the access was absolutely, and we had no difficulty at all. It was fascinating also to see these artists now in these studios, which were quite impressive until I realized that, which is interesting as well, is that the land is all still owned by China. So that if they don't like an artist for some reason, something happens, they'll just take it away. So they can have these huge studios and be removed in a week. So there's still peril in doing art in China.
Is there any chance that your film will be shown in China one day?
I believe there's a chance. I believe there's a chance because as China develops and they continue to confront their past, for instance, recently they mentioned the Tiananmen Square incidents, the high officials. So I think one day they're going to reckon with Tiananmen Square. They've already reckoned with the Cultural Revolution, and you can see in the film the Gang of Four was a scapegoat, and people were allowed to vent their anger about the Cultural Revolution. So this is 10 years after, this is 2 years after the end of the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution ends in 66, started in 66. And by 76, it's over. So I believe this period of Beijing Spring is going to be the next period that officialdom is going to accept and talk about. And then our film, which only shows, artists expressing themselves. Deng Xiaoping offered free expression in one wall located in downtown Beijing, next to Tiananmen Square, called Democracy Wall. So people experimented with free speech. So I do believe not right away, because this also ties into the Hong Kong democracy movement, so it will threaten China right now. But eventually these artists won't be censored anymore. And hopefully this film will pave the way to show that these guys were innovators, creators. They were lovers of China, and they just fought for freedom of expression and freedom for democracy.
Gaylen?
Yeah, I would also say, just to add, Democracy Wall, for people who didn't know, but they'll see in the film, they called it in the film the Twitter of their time. But they posted little, poems and essays and documents about democracy. Everything was there. People went to this wall to read protests and complaints. It was really an amazing place that you could post free expression that was unheard of during Mao.
You can see naked ladies, naked men, poetry. You can have people talk about, Mao, not in a way where you can jeopardize your freedom, but you can talk about the Cultural Revolution, basically, and your grievances during that time. So it was a place where you can get information, where you can get hip on what's happening, and you can express your art, music, dance, and literature.
And what does it mean to be, let's say, an underground artist in China today? What does it mean? What can you do?
Andy?
An underground artist today.
Maybe a radical artist, maybe a political artist.
Underground artists, I would say, is oxymoron. Political artists also, because I believe today in China, first of all, Deng Xiaoping's socialism with Chinese characteristics now also applies to the art market, and it's very capitalist driven. So it's market driven. So a lot of people want to become artists because there's fame and money involved. Therefore, they have to toe the party line, and they can't really criticize the government. As we see from people like Ai Weiwei, who confront the government, they make it very difficult for you to continue. and it's not a possibility. So even though there's great technical artists with great skill, and they're turning them out by the droves from art school, it lacks the substance, and it lacks the primal energy of the stars who are creating art for art's sake because they had to. There was no market. It's just pure expression.
Gaylen, this is my last question. Can a movie make a difference? Can a movie
make a difference?
Yeah, change something.
Sometimes. It depends, it depends. Everybody hopes that it does. I've had a film that Andy produced with me that made a difference called Killing Costner. We could see the difference there. I hope that this movie makes a difference. I just want to add, because it's the last question, I want to add that there were quite a few women artists in this group, stars, and I thought it was, we have at least two of them, I think, Andy, in the film, and they really made terrific contributions to the art and were equally brave. And one of them, which I really love, Xiao Fei, we filmed her with her mother, who was an artist under Mao. She's in her 80s now, and she was so amazing. And my favorite moment was when she turned to her daughter and said, "Well, it's a good thing you became an artist because you didn't do anything else very well."
And just to add to what Gaylen is saying, also Li Shuang, another woman in the film, ended up doing 2 years in detention. Her crime was being engaged to a foreigner, a Frenchman, So when you think about how courageous the artists in general were, as Gaylen rightly pointed out, the women artists had a lot more to overcome. First of all, here are these artists hanging out free sex, rock and roll in China in the 70s, unheard of. So women, were really relegated to a sexist system. And not only did she have to buck the stereotypes of sexism and being a woman, but now here she's an avant-garde artist, sleeping with a Frenchman openly, smoking, playing music, going to parties. It was very, very difficult for everyone.
All the things we did in the 70s and didn't think about it. That's true.
Yeah.
Gaylen Ross and Andy Cohen, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
We love your movie. Okay.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks. Andy Cohen and Gaylen Ross. Beijing Spring is in a special selection at FIFDH 2021. www.fifdh.org.